Huge shout out to today's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the easiest way to start your own website. This is probably the most asked about product since it came in. Since people knew that I had it, they want to know about it. What is it? It's the Gjallarhorn from Schiit. I don't know how to pronounce the name correctly. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and let's talk about the Schiit Gjallarhorn. I got a chance to talk to Jason in Corpus Christi last year, and we briefly touched on some of the products that were coming out. He didn't tell me exactly what was coming out, but he did give hints that it was kind of a departure from what their current lineup is. So I thought to myself, maybe it's toasters, maybe it's electric bicycles. But no, it wasn't. It was home theater and desktop amplification. I wasn't super surprised with small desktop amplifiers. What I was surprised is they came out with two of them in rapid succession. I was also surprised, really surprised, zero idea about kind of an immersive home theater experience. It's exciting times if you are in audio and you follow Schiit at all, because they are coming out with a lot of new products. And those products have speakers attached to them. So why don't we learn a little bit more about the Gjallarhorn? But first, a message from our sponsor, Squarespace. Do you have a business, or do you want to start a business? Are you a photographer? Do you have a family? Do you ever go on family vacations? Well, if the answer is yes, then you probably should start your own website. And there's no easier way to start your own website than Squarespace. Squarespace runs easy trials to where you don't even have to put your credit card in. And you can build a website and check it out for like 10 days. You can reserve domains, which is yourname.com or sodacanenthusiast.com or .net. There's a variety of domains available, and they'll help you find the ones that are. If you've never started a website before, don't worry about it. They have a whole section. It's a help section. And that help section has videos. If you got some customers or some family members or some fans, maybe you want to do a newsletter, and Squarespace will walk you through it in the help section. You want to sell stuff? Who doesn't want to sell stuff? Are you a band? Are you selling some merch? Are you a YouTuber selling some merch? Are you a worm farmer selling worms? Well, Squarespace has you covered. You can easily set up your online store and start selling things today. I set up a couple of Squarespace websites in less than a day. And if I can do it, you can do it. So run on over to squarespace.com/cheapaudioman. Enter the code cheapaudioman and get 10% off your first purchase. It's as easy as typing in a few things, picking a template, dragging your own pictures over, double-clicking on the text box, filling out your information, and you are done. You have a professional-looking website that can be turned on immediately. So go to squarespace.com/cheapaudioman. Use the code cheapaudioman to get 10% off your first order. Thank you, Squarespace. This, my friends, is the Gjallarhorn, or Gjallarhorn as I like to call it, because I think I just butchered that pronunciation. It is a speaker amp. We'll get into some of the specifications, but look at it. Look at it. It's actually it's the same footprint, same width as the Lokius, as the Modius, as the Morpheus. Just kidding. How about the Magnius? I didn't say that one, did I? And the Lear, which makes it real nice. Because on the back, there's a couple of different things, a couple of different options to hook this thing up. This is a speaker amp. No volume control, which means you will need either a DAC with volume control, or a source with volume control, or a preamp, like a Saga, which again, same dimensions. If you are new here, please consider subscribing and liking this video. We have over 690 videos, speakers, amps, DACs, turntables, home theater. Chances are there's something that you are interested in, and it really helps support the channel and get more of my free content out there. So thank you so much for watching, and enjoy the video. Many out there would consider this to be a bit of a lower powered amplifier, and I would agree, except people do somersaults over tube amps that have this type of power. So I think in most situations, but we'll talk about that later. The Gjallarhorn puts out 10 watts RMS per channel into an 8 ohm load and 15 watts RMS into a 4 ohm load. However, there is a way to get more power out of this amplifier. That's by bridging it using the XLR input, using it as in mono. And then you'll get 30 watts, which isn't too shabby. And it uses a continuity S output stage, which is fully discrete, fully complementary current feedback, and no capacitors in the signal path. I have no idea what any of that means. What's on the back? On the back, pretty straightforward. Over here, you have the RCA input. So if you're running this thing in stereo, you're gonna want to use these two. If you're gonna run this mono, then you're gonna want to use this and only this. Here are the speaker outputs, which are pretty cool because they're kind of internal and flush mount, which is actually nice. I didn't know how I was going to feel about that, but with banana plugs, which you kind of need, I mean, I guess you could shove bare wire in there. Probably want to buy some banana plugs though. And then over here, you have the very divisive toggle power switch on the back, although I don't really care because I don't turn these off generally. And then an IEC plug. Now, when you see the IEC plug, that means that this beautiful piece of equipment is made in California. Anything with a wall wart, made in Texas. Anything with the IEC connector, made in California. When you are using this in mono, it has an 8 ohm rating only. Now, I did drive some lower impedance speakers on here and it did not shut in. I think if you really push it really hard, it could shut this in. Put it into protect mode. But if you have a 6 ohm speaker, you're not really blasting it too loud, you're probably going to be okay. But I can't say that for sure. It says 8 ohms, so you probably should stick with 8 ohms, but I don't think it's going to blow up if you put a 6 ohm speaker on it, or even a 4 ohm speaker on it if you don't really push it super hard. The majority of my listening was done through the Wharfedale Evo 4.1, which is a two-way speaker. It has a sensitivity of 87 dB, which is not super efficient. Now, I was using this in mono mode, so 30 watts into an 87 dB speaker isn't terrible. However, I also used it in stereo mode, and the Evos are an 8 ohm speaker, so I felt safe putting it on here in mono. Also had the Wharfedale Denton 80th edition. It was all Wharfedale all the time. Over here in my near field listening, that speaker is a bit harder to drive than the Evo 4.1. It has a sensitivity of 86 dB and a nominal impedance of 6 ohms, which means it probably dips below there a few times. Once again, I had no issue running it in either stereo or mono. But to be fair, I wasn't trying to pump 90 dB SPL. That's SPL. That's sound pressure level. That's how loud things are. I wasn't trying to crank it terribly loud because this is a desktop amplifier. And if you're listening to things at 90 dB, maybe you shouldn't. For source, I was running the Weem Pro optical out into the Shelly Labs J2, the AKM version, balanced out into the Freya N, balanced out into the Gjallarhorns for when I was running it mono. For single-ended and RCA, I was using the Lear. It's a headphone amp preamp. You can turn off the tube or you can leave on the tube. But anyway, you can put up to 2 inputs on that thing and use it as, well, a preamp. And it has a remote control. The thing that immediately struck me about the Gjallarhorn was that nothing immediately struck me about the Gjallarhorn. So generally, when I turn something on, I'm like, oh, it's bassy, or ooh, this is super thin, or this is forward. Man, it's really harsh on top. None of that. It was just I turned it on, and quite frankly, I forgot that I even had them in the system because they just sounded great. It depends on what your definition of great is. If your definition of great is that there's nothing distracting you from enjoying the music and there's nothing that is adversely affecting the music to make it sound unnatural or unenjoyable, then I think the Gjallarhorn checks all those boxes. But not being obnoxious or offensive doesn't mean something sounds great. So I had to compare it to other products. First is first. Okay, the Fuzzy Audio BT20A Pro. So that's a Class D amplifier, and depending upon your power supply, you can get, well, a ton of power out of it. I use the included 32 volt 5 amp power supply. I think that probably puts power around the 40 to 50 watt per range for 8 ohm speakers. I use the Schiit Freya N, which has two single-ended outputs. I use the Ever Solo DAC Z8 as the source. Actually, the Weem Pro was the source. Anyway, I was able to go into both amps. Now, I was using my speaker switcher initially, but there's some issues with that, so I just did them separately. What I'll say is the biggest thing that jumped out at me is probably the noise floor. I know on paper the Fuzzy Audio probably has a lower noise floor, but what I heard through the Gjallarhorn was a bit more space. Instrument separation, very similar. Tonality was a little bit different, but with the Fuzzy, it does have tone controls, and there's no guarantee that those tone controls are perfect every time. This was a difficult comparison. The Fuzzy also seemed more dynamic, which makes sense because it's got twice to 3 times the amount of power to play around with. So at that point, I was just like, you know what? I'm going to hook up the Gjallarhorn's balanced. So I went balanced from the DAC, balanced into the Freya N, balanced into the Gjallarhorns. So I bridged them. And the way that you bridge them, pretty easily indicated right here. So you use the 2 positive taps off of both channels, and then you have the negative here, and then you have the positive here. So it's pretty straightforward to bridge these. In bridge mode, things got a lot more dynamic, and it really sounded like a different amp. Completely. More dynamic, but I felt like it was still maintaining the low noise floor. So I wanted to see how much I could get out of it. Turned it up, used my handy dandy SPL meter here on my phone. Got the transients into basically 90. And I don't think this amp, and fairly so, this is a desktop amplifier. And if people are listening at 80 to 90 dB, that's pretty loud. That's pretty silly listening levels. And I don't think this amp, even in the mono configuration, could really push things into the 90s. To be fair, most bookshelf speakers start to fall apart around 85 dB anyway. The good news is that I think any bookshelf that you put on this, depending upon sensitivity and impedance, of course, I think you're going to drive it to its fullest capabilities. But don't expect to take a pair of Gjallarhorns and put them in your living room and violate your HOA noise rules. I think they sound great. They're less dynamic, though, when you're just running it via stereo. And that could be because I was also using balanced sources, so I had double the voltage to work with. In a desktop situation, if you're into Schiit, got a lot of Schiit on your desk, I think this is a great choice. $600 may be a little bit much. If you're on a budget, I think there's a lot of choices out there from Fuzzy Audio, from IEMA. I do think the Gjallarhorn offers a little bit more clarity throughout the mid-range, but that also comes with a pretty significant price increase. Overall, it's a very attractive product from a very good company and a very good warranty. So if you do have any problems with them, you're not going to have any issues when you contact Schiit if you need anything replaced. They are beautiful. I wish they had more power. More power. And I still wish they would be about the same price. I understand that these aren't cheap to make either. If your budget is $600, you can also look at the Vidar. The Vidar has a lot more power on tap than the Gjallarhorn. But again, the Gjallarhorns are not meant to replace the Vidar. Otherwise, they wouldn't be selling both of them. For what it is, I think it is a premium desktop amplifier. I don't think you're listening above 85 dB, even if you have a speaker that's going to support it. I think this amp just doesn't quite handle it into the 90s. And that's not a bad thing. I don't think it's meant to do that. No problem recommending the Gjallarhorn if you use it in the right situation, if you use it on a desktop. Personally, if it's staying in my system, I'm going to put a Lokius in there as well because I do like to tweak things. Schiit's sound is always clean. I personally like a little bit more forest, a little bit more Amazon down there. That sounds bad. down there in the lower mids and the bass. I like it to be a little bit thicker. Humid. I don't know why. I like my music humid. And it's not the G-Horn's fault because I use tone controls and EQ on just about everything. So, if you want to support the channel, you can sign up for Patreon. Patreon.com/cheapaudioman. Every Sunday night, we have Patreon-only Zooms, Patreon-only Discord, Patreon-only Facebook. You can also use the links in the description. Those are affiliate links. Except for Schiit. I don't have an affiliate relationship with them. Most of the other stuff I do, though. You can also buy me a cup of coffee. Down at the bottom of the video, there's a thanks button. It's kind of like a tip jar. But don't feel compelled to buy me anything. You can sign up for Amazon Music, Rune, or Tidal. Links in the description. Click sign up. They have a free trial period. Even if you quit, I still get a couple of dollars. So, don't binge watch anything on Netflix or Hulu. Binge listen at your desktop. Maybe through your new Schiit G-Horns and fill your soul with happiness. And with that, I'm Randy. I'm the Cheap Audio Man.